So we are welcoming here today with us Mr. Debasish Chowdhury, editor in the Time magazine, a former editor in the South China Morning Post, and his articles are gaining a lot of traction these days from his new book called To Kill a Democracy, India's Passage to Despotism. He has recently won the Human Rights Press Awards, and moreover, his works on caste and migrant labor workers have been widely acclaimed and read. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayank. Thank you for having me in your show.
Debashish ji, why do you feel that India's democracy is under threat, and what is despotism?
Much of the concern about the state of India's democracy today stems from the quiet destruction of governing institutions under Modi and rising attacks on Muslims, which basically amounts to a slow destruction of the constitutional guarantee of equal citizenship. If you can win elections with pots of cash and private armies, and if you can manipulate the media and bend the governing institutions to your will, it really doesn't matter how frequently you hold elections. You will still basically be what Jefferson would call an elective despotism, which is what India is today. Sweden's BIDDEN Institute, as you know, calls India an electoral autocracy. It's because there is very little check on executive power. There is no internal democracy within the parties, and bear in mind, I'm not just talking about one party. I'm not just talking about the government at the center. This is a phenomenon which you see across India. There is no internal democracy within the parties. India holds the biggest elections in the world, but not one political party in India actually conducts internal elections. Legislators are bought and sold like cattle. Bills are hardly debated in the House. Governing institutions, which should be independent, they do the executive's bidding. The mainstream media, which is a very important check on executive power, has for most part been tamed. Self-censorship is rife, and most television channels behave like state media. You will see this everywhere, not just in the national level, national TV channels, but you see this in states as well. So we are basically witnessing unprecedented institutional capture in India. But of course, we are seeing an intensification of this process under Modi at the central level. If you set aside the emergency under Indira Gandhi, this is the greatest level of institutional capture that India has seen ever. So there is much to be worried about when it comes to Indian democracy. And as for despotism, there is old school despotism, there is new school despotism. Despotism is basically, old school despotism would be a system of governance where the monarch or the ruler does not need to care about the people. Its word is the final. In the new school despotism, of course, the people are co-opted to support their own rights. They're co-opted to believe that they're better off under a strong man than under a democratic system. So there is a feedback system with which the rulers work. That is the new age despotism, and which is what we are seeing not just in India but in a lot of other places.
Thank you for answering that question. Now that you say that despotism is at its peak, but you also say that in your book, which is being very widely circulated, read and sold, To Kill a Democracy, you say that India's passage to despotism began long before the damaging mood is. So when did the mood actually begin?
It began, as I say, right after the independence, where we chose not to create a welfare state for ourselves. For the problems with India's democracy, they did not start with Narendra Modi. many of these trends, which I was talking about, like buying and selling of legislators, etc., they predate Modi, but they are intensifying very rapidly, as I said, at the central level, or to the point that we have questions how long India can credibly claim to be a democracy.
So how do you say that? How long can we be the democracy?
Well, I am an India bull, so I think our huge diversity is an automatic check on any kind of hegemonic power, and our huge cultural diversity. So India is not China, India is not Hungary, and any political force which attempts to impose a homogeneity in India will at some point face cultural resistance and political resistance from the states. And I think this, I mean, there are already signs of this happening. I don't know how closely you have followed the Bengal elections in my state. In the last elections, Mamata Banerjee very carefully and very cleverly turned the uh, political contest into one between Bengalis and outsiders. So you can already see this happening, like framing of of hegemonic power as an outsider. Uh, these are early signs of the tensions that our federation will face uh, as long as we continue to have this political party in power which believes in, which says it wants to unify the country. Well, we have always been a very unified country. We don't really need anybody to unify us. We have always been unified. But when it says unify, it means homogenize. And as long as any political force wants to homogenize us, there will be resistance. If we are not even breathing the same air or have access to the same quality of water, or have similar life equalizing opportunities such as health and education, the question is, are we really equal? In which case, are we living in a democracy at all? So this inequality is not new, but it has got a lot worse. So which is why we say that the rot in Indian democracy runs very deep.
Okay, my next question is, how has the Indian judiciary responded to government pressure?
Uh, the judiciary is supposedly independent, but has been forced to take the path of least resistance. So while the jails are being stuffed with political prisoners arrested on ridiculous charges, and the state blatantly attacks a section of the population on the basis of their religion, such as this whole thing with bulldozers, which is going on, or the judiciary is happy to look away. And that's how it has caved into government pressure. I have to stress here that that unequal application of the law by the state is de facto Hindu Rashtra. When the state shows that it applies the law differently to Hindus and Muslims, it is announcing the arrival of Hindu Rashtra. And judiciary is meant to counter such majoritarian impulses. It has shied away from this responsibility. That is how it has responded to government pressure.
Okay, the other question is, why the answer to save democracy lies within what is the answer, and why Joe Biden's democracy summit is the height of hypocrisy?
Joe Biden wants to pretend that democracy is losing the battle with autocracy because of China and Russia. Now, that's a patent lie, as with America itself and the rest of the democratic world struggling with democracy. The root causes of the malaise are rising inequality, one, power grab by elites, two, and the resultant sense of powerlessness of the voters, three. These are the three things which basically um, drive people away from democratic systems. People lose their faith in democratic systems. Now, as people lose faith in their political systems, attraction increases for demagogues, who in turn assault rights and undermine democratic institutions even further. So that is why linking external influences with the rise of the autocrats in India, Brazil, Turkey, and Hungary is plain wrong. In India, for example, I mean, what has our democratic decline got to do with China and Russia? This is something that we have brought upon ourselves. So how will containing China, Russia cure the malaise that afflicts democracy today? That is why Biden's democracy summit is so hypocritical. This is also why the answer to save democracy lies within ourselves. We have to fix our own internal inequities and institutional decays. Other countries' rise and fall really have nothing to do with the internal threats that democracies face today.
So what is the answer to save the democracy that you said?
One basic problem with the problem of democracies everywhere, and in India in particular, is rising inequality, and the answer to that always is a welfare state. So what happened in India is that we did not create a welfare state when we set out on our journey as an independent country. We did not create a welfare state, and then later on, also when we did not create a welfare state, we did not create a level playing field for our population, and but we adopted a political system which is based on equality, which is hypocritical. And then we went on to embrace neoliberalism, where your basic needs are mediated by the market. So that only entrenches your inequalities even further. But we continue to call ourselves the biggest democracy in the world. So I think one of the basic solutions that we need, there are many things to talk about here on how to fix democracies, and these are complex topics, so I don't want to dumb them down into a few sentences. But one of the elementary things that we need to do is, before we talk about fixing our systems or the governing institutions, is that we must make an effort to establish a semblance of equality in the society. We all know that perfect equality is utopian. All societies have inequality. But the kind of in your face inequality that you see in India reduces democracy to a joke.
So now that coming to the next question, you have written an article for the Time magazine that you said there is no room for Muslim superstars. But in India, the Muslim superstars are already enjoying the pinnacle positions or the zenith position. So why do you feel that no more room for Muslim superstars? Why do you say so?
I think I wrote that for Harrods, not Time. My religious prejudices were never absent from the Indian life. But as Hindu supremacists go about poking old wounds of social divisions to harvest votes, they have reversed decades of healing, even if the healing was slow and imperfect. As a result, religious identities have begun to matter even in spheres in which they did not seem very relevant not too long ago, such as sports or fashion and arts. Bollywood is a perfect example, which is why we had Muslim matinee idols in an overwhelmingly Hindu majority country. But it is this deeply ingrained plurality that is antithetical to the BJP's politics of Hindu supremacism, which necessitates the drive to mow down Muslim influencers, to silence Muslim influencers like the three Khans, as public. These are public signals of subordinating the community. If their is to be a Hindu first order, there simply cannot be powerful Muslim role models. It is as simple as that.
So the other question is, during the recent outrage of the Islamic world against India, why do you think this outrage won't protect Indian Muslims?
Economic interests of the elite in the Islamic world means that commerce with India will always take precedence over the state of Muslims here. This outrage is essentially temporary and was triggered only by the mention of the Prophet. After all, in these 8 years, Islamic world has kept mum on the various injustices wreaked on Muslims in India, and they will continue to do so. So this outrage, yes, it does globally spotlight the Islamophobia of India's ruling party, but it won't really protect our Muslims. The BJP is programmatically committed to a culture war against the minorities. Nothing will change that. And as long as they don't um, uh, make silly statements about the Prophet or about the Arab world, I don't see the Arab world or the rest of the Islamic world um, outraging against the treatment of Muslims in India anytime soon. So this will go away. This will blow away.
So how the echoes of 1930s Germany are growing louder? What specifically of the 1930s? Do you mean the persecution of the Jews?
Yes, I mean the persecutions of the Jews. There are obviously you can see the signs. There are these vigilantes. There is an entire state machinery which is working against a particular community. And this again is an article I wrote for Harrods. This we have seen an escalation in the BJP's campaign of hate in the past several months, maybe about a year now. Atrocious hate crimes and speeches by fundamentalist groups offer a daily reminder to the Muslims of the new social hierarchy in a changing India, where Muslims can at best hope to be second-class citizens. Now, one noticeable aspect of this hate campaign is the growing instances of economic attacks on Muslims, from meat trade to stray bangle sellers and attacks on halal business. These are very reminiscent of the initial stages of what in Germany they used to call Juden boycott, which was a Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses that formally started in 1933 before slowly gathering pace, leading ultimately to the mass murder of Jews in the final solution. So I see disturbing shadows of that in what is happening in India. Of course, there are many other similarities. The way, for example, the NRC, the entire NRC exercise in Assam, the kind of screening process they instituted, they are very reminiscent of Hitler's methods. But that's a different. It's a very long discussion. We won't have time for that. But
Coming, yes,
this
yes.
particular piece was prompted by, I think, the attacks on small Muslim hawkers that I
Coming back,
found very similar to Shouldn't Boycott.
coming back to the international state of affairs in politics, why the US doesn't mind India's notable silence on Ukraine?
You know, India's traditional proximity to Russia precludes any possibility of New Delhi ever taking a stance against Moscow. The US should know that because much of that proximity, much of India's proximity to Russia is a result of America's own geopolitical choices in the past, such as aligning with Pakistan, for example. Or the US will tend to overlook India's hedging because India is too important an ally. Uh, in Modi, the US has an Indian leader with both the inclination and the ability to advance the Indo-US strategic and economic partnership further than ever before. And just as India can't afford to lose Russia, the US can't afford to lose India. It needs India to face off against the ultimate challenger to America's global dominance, which is China. Uh, Russia neither has the ambition nor the capacity to mount such a challenge. Russia may have taken center stage in American threat perception for the moment because of Ukraine, but the greater challenge to American dominance in global politics remains China. And that makes India indispensable for the US because when the focus returns to China, uh, then India's this ambivalence towards Russia will fade away. So I think it will, or the US will tend not to take to heart India's silence of Russia.
So you wrote the other article which says that the Quad alliance is ambiguous and contradictory. Why do you feel so?
I thought that article was prompted by the first Quad summit meeting, and I found it very odd that none of the members were even willing to say the word China. So, like Quad is called the NATO of the East, but NATO had a clear, um, uh, shall I say, uh, NATO had a clear agenda, very clearly defined agenda of countering the Soviet Union. But here you have this Eastern NATO, which can't even say China, which robs it of a common program, of a specific program. So we don't really know what it really wants to do. It says all kinds of things in codes. And if you say that we are strategically aligning against China, well, that makes sense. But to talk about democracy and to have India in your grouping is ridiculous in the day and age that we live in. So I found that, and there are other democracies which are not part of this alliance, such as South Korea, and to me it just reeks of double talk and hypocrisy.
Okay, so yes, now coming to the last question of our program, that is your article for Time magazine mentioning that Adani's time has just begun. Why do you say Adani is already at the peak of his richness? Why do you think that his time has just begun?
Um, I did this article as part of Adani is one of the 100 most influential people chosen by Time this year, and I did the profile on him. And in my profile, I have explained how he is the beneficiary of the government's efforts to create national champions. Now, what are national champions? National champions are business conglomerates that governments think can reap the advantages of scale. They can become global leaders and benefit the nation if they are nurtured by state favors and allowed to grow. Um, India is not the first one to try this strategy. There is a long history and precedence to this strategy, beginning with the US, uh, the French, the British, the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Koreans. Most recently, you have heard of chaebols in Korea. These are like these big business houses like Samsung, Hyundai, LG. They were all nurtured by the state. They were given advantages over others to grow. And companies are given special treatments like this if the state favors scale to competition. Such concentration of economic power generally go hand in hand with concentration of political power. They also feed each other. While in our country, while Modi represents a concentration of political power, Adani is a symbol of this new trend of concentration of economic power. And uh, and I have said that his time has just begun because with Modi approaching political hegemony, because there's virtually no opposition as of now, I think Adani's time has only just begun, and he has already and is becoming too big to fall. So even in a post-Modi scenario, if you have a political setup which is and say the Congress or some kind of alliance which comes to power, defeating the BJP, even then I think Adani will continue to grow, because he by now has become too big to fall.
So, Debashish ji, it was wonderful having you here, listening to your views, your vast ocean of thoughts. We have been reading them so far, but today to have you in person and speak on those topics and enlightening us and telling us about what the challenges India is facing, how we have never been a true democracy by not providing a level, being a welfare state. Thank you on behalf of all my viewers for being here with us and giving your very precious 1 hour of time. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.